They say wisdom comes with age, but what they don't tell you is how often that wisdom is treated like an unwelcome guest at the table. After 68 years of living, loving, and losing, I was about to learn the most painful lesson of all, that the family I had sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than a signature on a deed transfer and an inconvenient voice to be silenced. I never imagined that a single dinner would change everything, but sometimes the most powerful revelations come served between appetizers and dessert. The crystal glasses clinked as my son David topped off everyone's wine except mine. April in Connecticut brings a particular kind of evening chill that seeps through even the sturdiest of homes, and I'd lit a fire in the hearth of the dining room, the same hearth where I'd read bedtime stories to David 35 years ago. Now he sat at the opposite end of my table, a stranger in familiar skin, next to his wife Melissa, whose diamond tennis bracelet caught the light with every dismissive wave of her hand. "Mom, did you call that landscaper I recommended? The front garden is getting out of control." David's voice carried that familiar note of barely concealed impatience. At 42, my son had grown into the spitting image of his father, handsome, successful, and perpetually rushed. "I'm actually enjoying letting the wildflowers take over a bit," I said, cutting into my roast chicken. "The bees need the help, and I've always thought perfectly manicured lawns lack character." I smiled, hoping to lighten the mood that had been tense since they'd arrived an hour late. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly as she exchanged a look with my son. "Eleanor, when we move in, the first thing we'll need to do is hire a proper landscaping service. This house has such potential if it were properly maintained." The words, "when we move in," hung in the air like an uninvited ghost. Yes, I had mentioned potentially transferring the deed of my home to them, but her certainty made my throat tighten. This was still my house. The home where I'd raised my children, where I'd nursed my Robert through his final days before cancer took him 5 years ago. "Well, nothing's set in stone," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been thinking about that, actually. I might stay here a bit longer than we discussed." David set down his fork with a clink that seemed to echo through the dining room. "Mom, we talked about this. The stairs are getting difficult for you, and living alone at your age isn't practical. The condo complex we found has everything you need, all on one level." "I can manage the stairs just fine," I replied, trying to keep the defensiveness from my voice. "And I have my book club, my garden, my neighbors. Starting over somewhere new at 68 doesn't appeal to me as much as it once did." I could see the calculations happening behind David's eyes, the same look he'd had as a child when a promised trip to the amusement park was threatened by rain. This house, my home, sat on 2 acres in a now desirable part of Brookfield. Property values had tripled since Robert and I had purchased it in 1980. What had once been our humble teacher's refuge was now a valuable asset that David and Melissa had been eyeing since before Robert's body was cold. "Eleanor," Melissa said with that saccharine tone she reserved for me, "we're just concerned about you. Living alone, maintaining this big house. It's a lot for someone your age." "I taught high school English for 35 years, dear," I replied, reaching for my water glass. "I can assure you I'm quite capable of remembering to lock my doors and pay my bills." David cleared his throat. "That reminds me, Mom. Did you talk to Mr. Hoffman about the deed transfer? He said he hadn't heard from you." Mr. Hoffman, my late husband's attorney and golf buddy, who now apparently reported my legal decisions directly to my son. The betrayal stung, but I kept my face neutral, a skill honed through decades of parent-teacher conferences. "I've been busy," I said simply. "Too busy to make a phone call?" Melissa murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. I turned to my granddaughter, Emma, who at 16 had been silent throughout dinner, her attention divided between her plate and her phone beneath the table. "How's your English class this semester, Emma? Still reading The Great Gatsby?" Emma looked up, startled to be addressed. Yeah. It's fine, I guess." "Your grandmother used to teach that book," David said, his tone suggesting this was revelatory information rather than something he'd known his entire life. "I know, Dad." Emma rolled her eyes. "You've said that like 1,000,000 times." An awkward silence fell over the table. I felt myself becoming exactly what they thought I was, an inconvenient relic, taking up space and time in their busy lives. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Another family heirloom they'd probably discard, ticked away the seconds of uncomfortable silence. I was thinking, I ventured, that we might take a family trip this summer. Perhaps to the lake house in Maine? Emma might enjoy it before she heads off to college in a couple of years. Oh, Mom, David sighed, exchanging another look with Melissa. Emma has volleyball camp, and we're renovating the kitchen, and work is just insane right now. We could all use a vacation, I persisted. Robert and I always made time, even when you were swamped with school activities. Some of our best family memories were made at that lake. That was different, David said dismissively. Times have changed. Actually, Melissa interjected, setting down her wine glass with deliberate precision. Speaking of changes, we've been thinking about the lake house too. It sits empty most of the year, and the maintenance costs are just throwing money away. We should consider selling it. The lake house. My parents' cabin that they'd scrimped and saved for, where I'd spent every childhood summer, where I'd taught David to swim, where Robert had proposed to me under a blanket of stars. Another piece of my life they wanted to liquidate. The lake house isn't part of any deed transfer, I said, my voice firmer now. It's separately deeded to me. Yes, but logically, if you're downsizing, Melissa began. I think I'd like to hold on to it. I cut her off, something I rarely did. For now, at least. David pushed his plate away, half-finished. Mom, you're not being practical. You can't manage 2 properties at your age. The stairs at the lake house are even worse than here. What if you fell? I've been navigating stairs for 68 years without incident, I replied dryly. But you're not getting any younger, Melissa said with a tight smile. We're just trying to help you plan responsibly. The conversation was beginning to feel like being slowly buried alive. Each concerned comment, another shovelful of dirt atop my autonomy. I'd spent my entire adult life being responsible, saving for retirement, maintaining our modest lifestyle on teachers' salaries, putting David through college without a penny of debt. Now my responsibility was being weaponized against me. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm still capable of making my own decisions. Melissa sighed dramatically and turned to David. This is exactly what happened with my grandmother. She refused to leave that drafty old house until she broke her hip. Then it was too late for her to enjoy her golden years. I felt a flash of irritation. I'm not your grandmother, Melissa, and I'm sitting right here. I know, Eleanor, she said, not meeting my eyes. But sometimes people your age don't always know what's best. Old people shouldn't speak when important decisions are being made, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough that I could hear it clearly. They're too sentimental about things that don't matter anymore. The dining room fell silent. Even Emma looked up from her phone, eyes wide. David stared at his wife, his expression unreadable. I set my napkin beside my plate and stood slowly, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. I think dessert will have to wait for another time. I'm suddenly quite tired. Mom, David began, but I held up my hand. It's been a long evening, and I think we all need some time to reflect. David, would you please help me clear these plates? In the kitchen, away from Melissa's ears, I turned to my son. I'd like you all to leave now. Mom, she didn't mean... Yes, she did, I said quietly. And your silence was agreement enough. You're overreacting, he insisted, but couldn't quite meet my eyes. Melissa just wants what's best for everyone. This house is too big for you now. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, taught to stand up for what was right, to respect his elders, to value family above material things. The deed transfer is off the table, David. Indefinitely. His face flushed. You can't be serious. Because of one comment? Because I finally heard what you both have been trying not to say, I replied. This isn't about my well-being. It's about my assets. That's not fair, he protested. But there was a guilty flash in his eyes that told me everything. After they left, the house felt emptier than it had in all the years since Robert died. I sat in his old armchair by the fireplace, watching the embers die down to glowing coals. The grandfather clock struck 10, each chime reverberating through the silent rooms. I reached for the photo album on the side table. Pictures of a younger me and Robert, of baby David, of family Christmases and summer vacations. Moments that couldn't be sold or transferred by deed. In one photo, Robert stood with his arm around me on the porch of this very house the day we moved in. Our forever home, he'd called it. I closed the album and looked around at the living room, at the bookshelves Robert had built, at the worn spot on the carpet where our old dog used to sleep, at the small crack in the ceiling plaster that Robert had always meant to fix. This wasn't just a house. It was the physical embodiment of our life together. And I wasn't ready to give it up. Not to people who saw it as nothing more than square footage and market value. As I climbed the supposedly treacherous stairs to my bedroom that night, I made a decision. If David and Melissa thought they could push me into a tidy little condo and divvy up the life I'd built, they were sorely mistaken. I might be old in their eyes, but I still had my voice. And contrary to my daughter-in-law's opinion, I intended to use it. I didn't sleep that night. The curtains in my bedroom, the same floral pattern Robert and I had picked out 20 years ago, fluttered in the spring breeze while I stared at the ceiling. Melissa's words kept echoing in my mind. Old people shouldn't speak when important decisions are being made. The casual cruelty of it burned like acid, dissolving the careful illusions I'd maintained about my place in my son's life. Morning came with unforgiving clarity. I made my coffee strong, the way Robert used to like it, and took it out to the back porch. The garden was coming alive with spring, daffodils bobbing their yellow heads, the forsythia blazing gold along the fence line. Out of control, David had called it. Perhaps he was right, but there was beauty in this wildness that his manicured suburban lawn would never know. My phone rang at precisely 9 o'clock. David, right on schedule. "Mom," he began without preamble, "I want to apologize for last night." "Do you?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes, things got out of hand. Melissa was tired from work, and she didn't mean what she said." I took a sip of my coffee. "Did she tell you that?" A pause. "Well, no. But I know she respects you." "David," I said carefully, "respect isn't something you claim. It's something you demonstrate." He sighed, that familiar sound of exasperation I'd heard since he was a teenager. "Can we start over? Maybe come for dinner again next weekend?" "I don't think that's a good idea right now," I replied. "I need some time." "Time for what?" His voice took on that edge again. "Mom, we need to finalize these arrangements. The real estate market is hot right now, and if we wait... "If we wait, what? The house I've lived in for 40 years might be worth slightly less to whoever buys it after I'm gone?" "That's not what I meant," he backpedaled. "It's just that we've already started looking at schools in this district for Emma, and Melissa has been researching contractors for the renovations." The presumption stole my breath. "You've been making these plans without my final agreement?" "We thought it was settled," he said, and I could hear the frustration mounting in his voice. "You said you were considering it." "Considering is not confirming, David. I taught English for 35 years. I know the difference between those words." The line went quiet for a moment. When David spoke again, his voice was softer, cajoling, the tone he'd used as a child when he wanted an extra cookie before dinner. "Mom, we're just trying to help you. This house is so big for one person. The property taxes alone are my concern," I finished for him. "My finances are in order, David. Your father and I made sure of that." Another pause. "Have you at least called Mr. Hoffman?" "No," I said simply, "and I won't be calling him today either." I could almost hear him counting to 10 in his head. "Mom, I have my book club this afternoon," I interrupted. "We're discussing The Remains of the Day. Do you remember when I assigned that to your class?" "Mom, we're not talking about books right now." "Aren't we? Because I think Ishiguro had a lot to say about duty and regret, about lives spent in service to others without recognition. It's quite relevant." "For God's sake," David muttered. "Can we please stay on topic?" "I am on topic," I said. "My life, my choices, my house. That's the only topic here." The conversation ended shortly after, with David promising to call again in a few days when I'd had time to think clearly. As if clarity was what I lacked, rather than what I'd finally achieved. After hanging up, I sat for a long time watching two cardinals flit between the rhododendron bushes, splashes of vibrant red against the green. Robert had loved cardinals. "Good luck," he'd always say when we spotted one. I could use some luck now. At noon, I drove my 10-year-old Subaru downtown to meet my book club at Brookfield Coffee Company. The group had evolved over the decades, some members lost to moves, illness, or death, new ones joining along the way. But the core remained. Myself, Margaret, Vivian, and Lucille, all former teachers who'd started this club in 1989. "Eleanor," Margaret called as I entered, waving from our usual corner table. At 72, she was the eldest of our group, a retired math teacher with a spine as straight as a ruler and eyes that missed nothing. "You look like hell," she said bluntly as I sat down. "Always the charmer, Margaret," I replied with a small smile. "She's right," Vivian chimed in, peering at me over her reading glasses. "What's wrong? Is it your arthritis again?" I shook my head. "Family drama," Lucille groaned sympathetically. "Children or grandchildren? Both. And a daughter-in-law who thinks people my age should be seen and not heard." I gave them a condensed version of the previous night's dinner as we waited for our coffees. "The audacity," Margaret said, her voice sharp with indignation. "And David said nothing?" "Nothing meaningful," I confirmed. "He called this morning to smooth things over, but it was clear he still expects me to sign over the house and shuffle off to that condo they've picked out." "Which you don't want," Vivian stated rather than asked. "No," I admitted. "I don't. Not yet, anyway." "Then don't," Lucille said simply. She'd always been the most direct among us. "It's your house, Eleanor. Your life." "But what if they're right?" I found myself asking. "What if I am being impractical? Sentimental about things that don't matter?" "Who decides what matters?" Margaret challenged. "Some slip of a girl who wasn't even born when you and Robert bought that house? When you planted those gardens? When you made all those memories?" I smiled gratefully at my friend's fierceness, but sighed. "David thinks I'm being stubborn." "Good," Vivian declared. "Stubborn kept us in classrooms for 30-plus years. Stubborn got us through marriages, children, divorces, deaths. Stubborn is how women our age have survived." Our coffees arrived, and the conversation shifted to the book, but my mind kept drifting. These women understood what David and Melissa couldn't, that age hadn't diminished us. It had concentrated us like a reduction sauce, intensifying who we'd always been. After book club, instead of going home, I found myself driving to Brookfield Public Library. I'd spent much of my career bringing students here, instilling a love of research that Google could never replace. The head librarian, Janet Chen, had once been my student. "Mrs. Harlow," she greeted me warmly. "Twice in 1 week. We're honored." "Hello, Janet," I smiled. "I need to do some research, but not the literary kind today." She raised an eyebrow. "Intriguing. How can I help?" "I need information on property law, specifically about deed transfers, trusts, and elder rights in Connecticut." Janet's expression shifted subtly. "Is everything okay?" "Just doing my due diligence," I assured her. "I'm considering some changes and want to understand all my options." She nodded, professional discretion taking over. "Let me show you where to start." For the next 2 hours, I sat at a computer station, taking meticulous notes. The teacher in me had always believed in being well-informed, and now that methodical approach served me well. I learned about revocable living trusts, about Connecticut's elder law statutes, about property tax exemptions for seniors. I printed articles, legal summaries, blank forms to review. When I finally drove home, the sky was turning dusky pink, and my mind was churning with possibilities I hadn't considered before. I wasn't helpless, I wasn't without options, and I certainly wasn't without rights. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street, Melissa's white Lexus SUV. My daughter-in-law sat on my front porch steps, her posture perfect, her blonde hair falling in artful layers around her face. I took my time, gathering my library materials before approaching. "Eleanor," she stood as I walked up the path. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "This is a surprise," I said neutrally, unlocking the front door. "I wanted to apologize in person," she said, following me inside without waiting for an invitation. "What I said last night was completely inappropriate." I set my purse and papers down on the entry table. "Yes, it was." Melissa blinked, perhaps expecting more resistance to her apology. I was tired and frustrated, and I spoke without thinking. I murmured, moving into the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" She followed, looking slightly off balance by my calm demeanor. "Yes, thank you." I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, taking my time selecting tea bags from the wooden box Robert had made me for our 25th anniversary. "Earl Grey, okay?" "That's fine," she said, perching on one of the kitchen stools. Her eyes darted around, assessing the vintage appliances, the worn countertops, the collection of refrigerator magnets from places Robert and I had visited. I could almost see the renovation plans forming behind her eyes. "Eleanor," she began again as I set out mugs, "I want you to know that David and I only want what's best for you." "That's very kind," I replied mildly. "But I'm still capable of determining what's best for myself." The kettle whistled, and I poured the steaming water into the mugs. "Milk? Sugar?" "Just a splash of milk," she said, then continued. "Of course you are. It's just that sometimes we need to think practically about the future." I handed her the tea and leaned against the counter, studying her. Melissa was beautiful in that polished way that required considerable effort. Highlighted hair, carefully applied makeup, expensive clothes that looked effortlessly chic. I'd once been intimidated by that perfection, feeling dowdy and outdated beside her. Not anymore. "Melissa," I said quietly, "let's be honest with each other. This isn't about my future. It's about yours. The house you want in a better school district, the status of this address, the potential resale value." Her teacup clattered against the saucer. "That's not fair, Eleanor, isn't it?" I took a sip of my tea, the familiar bergamot scent grounding me. "Let me ask you something. If this house were a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, would you and David be so concerned about my ability to navigate stairs?" Color bloomed high on her cheekbones. "That's not because I've noticed that your concern about my well-being seems directly proportional to the value of my assets." "How can you say that?" Melissa's voice rose slightly. "David loves you. We both care about you." "I believe that David loves me," I said carefully. "In his way. But love and respect aren't always the same thing, are they?" She set her teacup down, barely touched. "I didn't come here to be accused." "No, you came here to smooth things over so I'll sign away my home," I replied, surprising myself with my directness. "But that's not happening, Melissa. Not now, possibly not ever." Because of one thoughtless comment, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "I've already apologized." "No, because this house is more than just real estate to me. It's 40 years of memories. It's the home where David grew up. It's the last place I shared with Robert." My voice caught slightly on my late husband's name. "I'm not ready to give that up." Melissa's expression softened into something that might have been genuine if it hadn't been so practiced. "Eleanor, I understand sentimentality, I really do. But at your age—" "At my age," I interrupted, "I've earned the right to make my own choices without being dismissed." She looked at me for a long moment, calculation visible behind her eyes. Then she reached across the counter and placed her manicured hand over mine. "Of course you have. We just want to help you through this transition. Maybe we rushed things." I extracted my hand gently. "Maybe you did. So we'll slow down," she conceded, her smile returning. "Take more time to find the perfect condo for you, one you'll truly love." I shook my head. "Melissa, I'm not looking for another place to live. Not right now. But eventually we all die," I said bluntly. "But until then, I plan to live where I choose." Her smile faltered. "David will be disappointed." "David has survived disappointment before," I replied, thinking of the many times my son's expectations had collided with reality. "He'll survive this too." Melissa stood, smoothing her cashmere sweater. "Well, I should get going. Emma has volleyball practice." I walked her to the door, maintaining my composure. Only when her Lexus had disappeared down the street did I allow my shoulders to slump slightly. Confrontation had never been my strong suit. As a teacher, I'd preferred gentle guidance to direct challenge. But standing in my kitchen, I felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after years of pressure. That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I went into Robert's study, the small room off the living room that I'd kept largely untouched since his death. His reading glasses still lay on the desk beside a dog-eared copy of John le Carré's A Perfect Spy. His favorite cardigan hung over the chair. I sat at his desk and opened the bottom drawer where we'd kept important documents. The folder labeled Will and Estate was thick with papers. Our wills, insurance policies, property deeds, financial statements. Robert had always been meticulous about our affairs, updating everything annually on our anniversary. Our last update had been 6 months before his diagnosis. I spread the papers across the desk, reading carefully through legal language that once seemed impenetrable. But now, after my afternoon at the library, was becoming clearer. Our wills were simple mirror images, everything to the surviving spouse, then to David upon both our deaths. Standard? Straightforward. But things had changed. David had changed. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed. No longer willing to assume my son would honor my wishes once I was gone. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I rarely used. Hello? The voice that answered was deeper than I remembered. Michael, it's Eleanor Harlow. Mrs. H. The surprise and warmth in his voice made me smile. Michael Cooper had been one of my favorite students years ago. Bright, thoughtful, with a mind that questioned everything. Now he was a successful attorney in Hartford, specializing in estate planning. How are you? It's been ages. I'm well, thank you. And yourself? How's Patrice and the children? Everyone's great. Patrice is still teaching at Westover, and the twins just turned 13. God help us. He chuckled. What can I do for you? Just calling to catch up? Actually, I said, I need some legal advice. About my will and property matters. There was a slight pause. Of course. Would you like to come into the office? I would. Yes. As soon as possible, if you have availability. We scheduled an appointment for the following Wednesday. After hanging up, I sat for a long time in Robert's chair, running my fingers over the worn leather armrests where his hands had rested for countless hours. Am I doing the right thing? I asked the empty room, almost expecting to hear his reassuring voice. Only silence answered, but I felt calmer nonetheless. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. David called twice, each conversation a careful dance around the central issue. He'd apparently instructed Emma to call as well, her adolescent awkwardness transparent over the phone as she dutifully asked how I was feeling and if I needed anything. I kept these conversations light, asking about her volleyball team and her English class, never mentioning the tension with her parents. On Tuesday evening, the night before my appointment with Michael, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, I found Emma standing on my porch, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Emma, this is a surprise. I stepped back to let her in. Does your father know you're here? She shrugged one shoulder. Kind of. I told him I was going to study with Madison, but I came here instead. Her mom dropped me off. I frowned slightly. Honey, I don't want to be in the middle of a deception. It's not really lying, she protested. I am going to study. I just wanted to do it here, with you. She pulled a copy of The Great Gatsby from her backpack. I have a paper due Friday, and I'm totally stuck. The English teacher in me couldn't resist. Well, come on in then. Have you had dinner? I grabbed a sandwich earlier. She followed me into the kitchen, where I put on the kettle for hot chocolate, her favorite since childhood. As the milk warmed, Emma sat at the counter, flipping through her book with its many highlighted passages and sticky notes. Dad says you're mad at them, she said without looking up. I measured cocoa powder carefully. I'm not mad exactly, just disappointed. Because of what Mom said about old people? She feels really bad about that. Does she? I stirred the cocoa into the milk. Emma looked up, her young face serious. I think so. They've been fighting about it. That surprised me. David rarely confronted Melissa directly. I'm sorry to hear that. It's weird, she continued, accepting the mug I handed her. They keep talking about this house like they already own it. Mom's been showing her friends pictures of the rooms and talking about knocking down walls and stuff. I sat beside her, hiding my shock. Has she now? Emma nodded, oblivious to my reaction. Yeah, and Dad keeps saying you'll come around once you accept reality. She made air quotes with her fingers, then looked at me directly. But you're not going to, are you? No, I said gently. I'm not. She nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Good? Yeah. This house is like you, Grandma. It wouldn't be the same if Mom got her hands on it. She took a sip of her hot chocolate. Plus, I don't really want to change schools. I felt a rush of affection for this girl, so caught between childhood and adulthood, between loyalty to her parents and her own emerging sense of self. Let's look at that paper topic. For the next hour, we sat at the kitchen table discussing Fitzgerald's symbolism and the American dream. Emma was sharper than she let on, her insights cutting through to the heart of the novel once she stopped trying to guess what her teacher wanted to hear. You know, I said, as she was packing up, You remind me of your grandfather when you get excited about an idea. He had that same look in his eyes. Really? She seemed pleased. I don't remember him that well. You were only 11 when he passed, I said. But he adored you. He used to say you had an old soul. Emma smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. I wish I remembered him better. I have albums full of photos, I offered, and stories. Anytime you want to hear them. She nodded, suddenly shy again. I should go. Madison's mom is picking me up. As I watched her walk down the driveway to the waiting car, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about legacies, about truth, about what we pass on to the next generation beyond mere property. That night, I wrote a letter to my son. Not an email, but an actual letter on the stationery Robert had given me one Christmas. I chose my words carefully, explaining my feelings without accusation, my decisions without apology. I didn't mention my upcoming appointment with Michael Cooper. Some boundaries needed to be established clearly. I sealed the envelope, but didn't address it yet. Tomorrow would bring new information, new options. For the first time in months, I felt not just anger or hurt, but a glimmer of something more powerful. The quiet certainty of a woman who had finally remembered her own voice. The drive to Hartford the next morning felt like crossing a threshold. Spring rain pattered against my windshield as I navigated the familiar route, the same road I'd taken thousands of times during my teaching career. But today's journey wasn't to shape young minds. It was to protect what was mine. Michael Cooper's law office occupied the third floor of a renovated brick building downtown. The reception area was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Nothing like the intimidating mahogany and leather of Mr. Hoffman's practice. Mrs. Harlow. Michael emerged from his office with a broad smile, extending both hands to clasp mine. It's wonderful to see you. At 45, he'd grown into his features. The gangly teenager, now a confident man with laugh lines around his eyes and a touch of silver at his temples. Please, come in. His office reflected his personality. Bookshelves lined with legal texts, but also novels and history books, family photos arranged on his desk, a child's drawing framed on the wall. I settled into the chair across from him, strangely nervous now that I was here. So, he said, after we'd exchanged pleasantries, you mentioned estate planning. What specifically can I help you with today? I took a deep breath. I need to make changes to my will and establish some protections for my property. Okay, he nodded, his expression turning professional. Can you tell me what's prompted this? I gave him an abbreviated version of recent events, keeping my tone factual rather than emotional. Michael listened attentively, taking occasional notes, but mostly maintaining eye contact. I see, he said when I'd finished. And your current will leaves everything to your son? Yes, it was drafted 12 years ago when Robert and I updated our estate plan. And your primary concerns now are that my wishes regarding my property won't be respected, I said simply. I'm not ready to leave my home, but there's considerable pressure for me to do so. I want to ensure that I can't be forced out, now or in the future, and that any eventual transfer of assets happens on my terms. Michael nodded thoughtfully. There are several options we might consider. He opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad. First, let's talk about your current situation. Do you have any mortgages or liens on your properties? No, both the house in Brookfield and the lake house in Maine are fully paid off. Good. And your financial situation otherwise? Retirement accounts, investments, cash reserves? I provided him with the details of my finances, the teacher's pension, Robert's life insurance, our modest but carefully managed investments. Michael took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. You're in a strong position, he said finally. No debt, stable income, significant assets. That gives us flexibility. What do you recommend? I asked. Based on what you've told me, I think we should consider establishing a revocable living trust. He leaned forward slightly. It would give you several advantages. First, it allows you to maintain complete control over your assets during your lifetime. Second, it provides privacy, unlike a will, which becomes public record after death. Third, it can include specific conditions about property use or transfer. And it can't be contested? Michael smiled slightly. Nothing is completely bulletproof in legal terms, but a properly constructed trust is much harder to challenge than a will. especially if you're demonstrably of sound mind when it's created. Which I am, I said firmly. I have no doubt, he replied. We'll have a geriatric specialist conduct an evaluation to document that fact. Standard procedure for clients over 65 to prevent any future claims of diminished capacity. We spent the next hour discussing details, naming a successor trustee, my friend Margaret, not David, specifying that I could remain in my home for life, establishing conditions for eventual distribution of assets. What about Emma? I asked. Can I designate something specifically for her? Absolutely. We can create a provision for her education or set aside the lake house specifically for her after you're gone. I nodded, thinking of Emma's face when I'd mentioned her grandfather. I'd like to do that. The lake house should go to her directly, not to David and Melissa. Michael made a note. We can arrange that. And for the Brookfield house? I hesitated. I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to leave it to David, despite everything. He grew up there. But another part of me, you don't have to decide everything today, Michael assured me. The beauty of a revocable trust is that you can modify it as circumstances change. For now, we can simply establish the framework. By the time our meeting concluded, a weight had lifted from my shoulders. I had a plan, a path forward that preserved my autonomy while still providing for my family's future, but on my terms, not theirs. I'll have draft documents for you to review within 2 weeks, Michael said as he walked me to the elevator. In the meantime, try not to worry. I won't, I promised, and was surprised to realize I meant it. The rain had stopped during our meeting, and weak sunshine gilded the wet streets as I walked to my car. I felt lighter than I had in months, energized by having taken concrete action rather than just reacting to David and Melissa's manipulations. On impulse, I decided to make another stop before heading home. The nursing home where my oldest friend, Helen Patterson, now lived, was just 20 minutes away. Helen and I had met in college, shared an apartment after graduation, and stood as each other's bridesmaids. Life had taken us in different directions. She'd pursued a career in nursing while I taught, but our friendship had endured for nearly 50 years. Pinewood Care Center was one of the better facilities, with bright common areas and attentive staff. Still, the institutional smell of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables hit me as I signed in at the front desk. She's having a good day, the receptionist told me with a smile. You'll find her in the sunroom. Helen sat in a wheelchair near the windows, a book open on her lap. At 70, Parkinson's had curved her once straight spine and tremors shook her hands, but her mind remained sharp as ever. Eleanor. Her face lit up as I approached. What a wonderful surprise. I bent to hug her, careful not to disturb the throw blanket across her knees. I was in Hartford for a meeting and thought I'd stop by. The best kind of visit, she said, gesturing to the chair beside her. Sit, tell me everything. For the next hour, I did just that, recounting the dinner disaster, Melissa's comment, David's expectations, my meeting with Michael. Helen listened with the same attentiveness she'd shown since our college days, her eyes bright with intelligence despite her body's betrayal. Good for you, she said when I'd finished. It's about time you stood up for yourself. You think I'm doing the right thing? I know you are. She reached out a trembling hand to grasp mine. Eleanor, look around you. This is what happens when you let others make your choices. I glanced around the sunroom at the other residents, some engaged in activities, others staring vacantly out windows or at silent televisions. Your situation was different. After James died, I let my daughter convince me to sell my house and move in with her family, Helen interrupted. Then when my health declined, they decided they couldn't manage anymore. And here I am. Her bitter smile held no rancor, just resignation. I should have kept my home as long as I could. Independence once surrendered is rarely regained. Her words settled over me like a mantle. I'm sorry, Helen. I should visit more often. She squeezed my hand. You come exactly as often as you should. Now tell me about your book club. What are you reading these days? We chatted about books and mutual friends until a nurse appeared to take Helen to physical therapy. As I was leaving, she called after me. Eleanor, remember what Virginia Woolf said. A woman must have a room of her own. Hold on to yours for as long as you can. The drive home felt different, each mile bringing me closer, not just to my house, but to a renewed sense of purpose. Helen's situation had shown me a possible future I was now determined to avoid. Not just for my sake, but for hers, for all the women who'd had their autonomy slowly eroded by well-meaning children and societal expectations. When I pulled into my driveway, I was surprised to see David's BMW parked at the curb. He sat on the front steps, scrolling through his phone, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him. He looked up as I parked, his expression unreadable. "Mom." He stood as I approached. "Where have you been? I've been calling all morning." "I had an appointment in Hartford," I said, unlocking the front door. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming by?" He followed me inside, his frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "I thought we should talk in person. After everything that's happened." I set my purse down and turned to face him. "Would you like some coffee?" "No." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart clenched. "I want to know what's going on. First you refuse to discuss the deed transfer, then Emma comes home talking about how great it was to study at your house, and now you're mysteriously unavailable all morning." "I wasn't aware I needed to clear my schedule with you," I replied mildly, moving to the kitchen to put on the kettle for my own tea. David followed, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. "That's not what I meant. I'm concerned about you." "Are you?" I measured loose tea into the infuser. "Or are you concerned about your plans for this house?" His jaw tightened. "That's unfair." "Is it?" I turned to face him fully. "Emma tells me Melissa has been showing her friends pictures of my home, discussing renovations, as if it's already hers." David had the grace to look embarrassed. "She's just excited about the possibilities. We both are. Without confirmation from me that any transfer is happening." He sighed heavily. "Mom, we've been talking about this for months. You seemed on board until recently." "I was considering it," I corrected him, "and now I've decided against it." "Because of one comment from Melissa?" She apologized for that. "No." The kettle whistled, and I poured the steaming water into my teapot. "Because I've realized that staying in my home is what's best for me right now." David's expression darkened. "And what about what's best for us?" "For Emma? This neighborhood has the best schools in the county." "Emma seems quite content with her current school," I observed. "She's doing well in her classes." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, David?" I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "That your convenience outweighs my wishes? That at 68, I should quietly step aside so you and Melissa can have what you want?" He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. The mother he remembered had always accommodated, always put his needs first, always sought to keep the peace. That woman was gone, transformed by grief, by time, and by the cold reality of her son's priorities. "This isn't like you," he said finally. "Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think," I replied, pouring my tea. "People change, David. Even mothers, even at my age." He left without finishing our conversation, muttering something about being late for a meeting. The abruptness of his departure suggested I'd struck a nerve. For a moment, I felt the familiar maternal guilt. Had I been too harsh? Too unyielding? But then I remembered Helen in her wheelchair, warning me about surrendered independence. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I'd been honest. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a strange new rhythm. David's calls became less frequent, more perfunctory. Melissa didn't reach out at all. Only Emma maintained contact, texting me pictures of her volleyball games and updates about her Gatsby paper. She'd received an A. The distance hurt, but there was also a curious freedom in it. Space to breathe, to think, to rediscover myself beyond the role of mother and widow. I filled my days with purpose. I joined a twice-weekly yoga class for seniors at the community center, reconnected with former colleagues for lunch, and spent long afternoons in my garden, coaxing spring blooms from the warming earth. In the evenings, I sorted through Robert's things, not to erase him, but to honor him properly, keeping what mattered and letting go of what didn't. Michael Cooper called on a Thursday afternoon. "The trust documents are ready for your review," he said. "Would you like me to mail them, or would you prefer to come in?" "I'll come to you," I decided. "Tomorrow, if that works." The next day, I spent 3 hours in Michael's office, going through each document line by line. The language was dense with legal terminology, but Michael patiently explained every provision, every consequence. We made a few adjustments, strengthening the language about my right to remain in my home, clarifying the terms for Emma's inheritance of the lake house. "What about the Brookfield house?" Michael asked again. "Have you decided?" I had been wrestling with this question for days. "I want to leave it to David," I said finally. "But with conditions." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?" "That he cannot sell it for at least 5 years after my death. That he must maintain the gardens as they are. And—" I hesitated, then committed to the thought that had been forming, that he must establish a scholarship in Robert's and my name at Brookfield High. $10,000 annually for 10 years, to be awarded to a student pursuing education as a career. Michael smiled as he made notes. "A fitting legacy for 2 dedicated teachers. Will these conditions be enforceable?" "Yes, if we structure them correctly. We'll create what's called an incentive trust. If David violates any of the conditions, the house would be sold and the proceeds would go to fund the scholarship instead." I nodded, satisfied. It felt right, honoring both my son's connection to his childhood home and the profession that had defined Robert's and my lives. After signing the final documents, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had taken control of my future, protected my assets, and ensured my wishes would be respected. The next step would be to tell David, but not yet. I needed the right moment, the right approach. That opportunity came sooner than expected. The following Sunday, David called with an unusual request. "Mom, we're hosting a dinner party next Saturday, some colleagues from the firm and their spouses. Our regular sitter is unavailable. Could Emma stay with you overnight?" "Of course," I said, pleased at the prospect of time with my granddaughter. "I'd love to have her." "Great." He sounded relieved. "I'll drop her off around 5. "Why don't you all come for an early dinner before your event?" I suggested impulsively. "Nothing fancy, just family." A pause. "All of us? Including Melissa?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I think it's time we cleared the air, don't you?" Another, longer pause. "All right, we'll be there at 5. After hanging up, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Was I ready to face Melissa again? To tell them both about the trust? But the alternative, continuing this cold war of silence and strained phone calls, was worse. Robert would have wanted me to try to mend fences, even while standing my ground. I spent the week preparing, not just the meal, a simple but elegant spring menu of salmon, asparagus, and new potatoes, but mentally rehearsing what I wanted to say. The trust documents sat in my desk drawer, not hidden but not displayed either. I would bring them out only if the conversation naturally led that way. Saturday arrived with perfect spring weather, sunshine warming the fresh green of my garden, birds singing in the old maple tree. I had just finished setting the dining room table when the doorbell rang. David, Melissa, and Emma stood on the porch, a picture-perfect family in casual weekend attire. Emma immediately hugged me, while David and Melissa hung back slightly, their smiles polite but reserved. "Come in," I said warmly. "Everything's almost ready." Emma helped me in the kitchen, while David and Melissa moved somewhat awkwardly through the living room, making small talk about the weather and David's upcoming case. The tension was palpable but not hostile, more uncertain, as if none of us quite knew how to navigate this new territory. Dinner began quietly, with conversation limited to safe topics: Emma's volleyball team, the salmon recipe, a new restaurant in town. It wasn't until we were halfway through the meal that David cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been thinking about our last conversation," he began, setting down his fork, "and we realize we may have been presumptuous." I looked at him in surprise. This was not what I'd expected. Melissa nodded, her expression carefully composed. "We should have been more considerate of your attachment to this house and your need for independence." Thank you," I said cautiously. "I appreciate that." David exchanged a glance with Melissa before continuing. "We found another house in Westport. It's not in quite as good a school district, but it's closer to my office, and the renovation costs would be manageable." "I see." I took a sip of water, processing this information. "So, you're no longer interested in this house?" "Well," Melissa interjected, her smile tight, "we still think it would be better for you to downsize eventually, but we understand it might not be the right time yet." I nodded slowly, recognizing the concession for what it was, not a complete abandonment of their plans, but a strategic retreat. They'd found an alternative, but they were still hoping I would eventually come around. I'm glad you found something that works for you, I said sincerely. Westport is a beautiful town. The conversation shifted to their house hunting experiences, the tension gradually easing. By dessert, a lemon tart that Emma had helped me prepare, we were almost comfortable again, the familiar rhythms of family dinner reasserting themselves. After clearing the plates, I made coffee while David checked his watch. We should head out soon, he said. The party starts at 7:30. Before you go, I said, there's something I should tell you. I took a deep breath. I've established a revocable living trust for my estate. David's head snapped up. A what? A trust, I repeated calmly. It specifies my wishes for my property and assets, both now and after I'm gone. Why would you do that without talking to us? His voice held a note of betrayal. Because it's my estate, David. My decision. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly does this trust specify? I maintained my composure. That I retain full control of all my assets during my lifetime. That the lake house will go to Emma when she's 25. And that this house will eventually go to you, David, with certain conditions. Conditions? He looked both surprised and suspicious. What kind of conditions? Nothing onerous, I assured him. Just provisions to honor your father's and my legacy. You didn't trust us to do that on our own? Melissa asked, her polite mask slipping slightly. I wanted to ensure my wishes would be respected, I said simply. David pushed back his chair. I can't believe you did this without consulting me. I'm an attorney, Mom. I could have helped. I had excellent legal counsel, I replied. A former student of mine who specializes in estate planning. A former student? Melissa repeated incredulously. Instead of family? Mom, this is... David began, but I held up my hand. This isn't about excluding you, David. It's about protecting what matters to me. The trust ensures that Emma will have the lake house where you spent your childhood summers. It ensures that Brookfield High will have a scholarship in our name. And yes, it ensures that you will inherit this house, but in a way that honors what it has meant to our family. David's expression was unreadable. We should go. We'll be late. David. Not now, Mom. He stood abruptly. We'll talk about this another time. They left in a flurry of hurried goodbyes, Melissa barely making eye contact as they walked to the car. Only Emma seemed unaffected by the tension, giving me an extra hug and promising to help make pancakes in the morning. As their car pulled away, I stood in the doorway feeling strangely calm. The conversation hadn't gone as I'd hoped, but it had gone as I'd expected. David would need time to process, to reconcile this new version of his mother, one who made major decisions without his input or approval. Well, that could have gone better, I said aloud to the empty house. Emma and I spent a lovely evening watching old movies and looking through photo albums. She was particularly drawn to pictures of her father as a child, giggling at his 1980s fashion choices and gangly teenage phase. He looks happy, she observed, pointing to a photo of 16-year-old David with his arm around Robert, both of them holding fishing rods at the lake house. He was, I confirmed. Your grandfather taught him to fish when he was 5. They went every summer until David left for college. Why did they stop? I considered the question. Life got busy, I suppose. Careers, relationships, priorities change. That's sad, Emma said simply. It is, I agreed. But that's why memories matter. Why places matter. She looked up at me with those perceptive eyes. Is that why you won't sell the house? Because of the memories? Partly, I admitted. But also because it's still my home. I'm not ready to leave it yet. Emma nodded, seeming to understand something beyond her years. I'm glad you're keeping it. And the lake house, too. The lake house will be yours someday, I told her. I've made sure of that. Her eyes widened. Really? Mine? When you're 25, I confirmed. Old enough to appreciate it, young enough to enjoy it for many years. She threw her arms around me in a spontaneous hug. Thank you, Grandma. That night, after Emma had gone to bed in her father's old room, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. The evening hadn't unfolded as planned, but something important had happened nonetheless. A truth had been spoken. A boundary established. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace in my own home, secure in the knowledge that its future and mine were protected. Summer arrived with a vengeance that year. Heat shimmering off sidewalks, air conditioners humming in windows, garden plants wilting by midday despite morning waterings. 2 months had passed since I'd told David and Melissa about the trust, and in that time, a new pattern had emerged in our relationship. David called regularly, but kept conversations brief and superficial. Melissa remained distant, sending perfunctory birthday and Mother's Day cards, but declining invitations to Sunday dinners. Only Emma maintained a genuine connection, spending weekends with me whenever her increasingly busy teenage schedule allowed. I didn't push. Decades of teaching had taught me that some lessons need time to sink in, that understanding often comes in its own season. So I tended my garden in the cool morning hours, met with my book club, practiced yoga, and waited. The first real break in the standoff came in late July when David called with an unexpected question. "Mom, do you still have Dad's old toolbox? The one with the woodworking tools?" "Of course," I replied, surprised. "It's in the basement workshop right where he left it. Would it be all right if I came by to use them? I'm trying to build a bookshelf, and those hand tools are better than anything I could buy now." "You're always welcome here, David," I said, careful to keep my tone neutral. "You don't need a reason." He came the following Saturday morning, dressed in old jeans and a faded t-shirt I hadn't seen in years. I showed him to the basement workshop, a space I rarely entered since Robert's death. Everything remained exactly as my husband had left it. Tools hanging in precise order on pegboards, jars of screws and nails arranged by size, the workbench clean but for a fine layer of dust. David stood motionless in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in the preserved space. "It's like he just stepped out for a minute," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. He moved slowly into the room, running his fingers along the workbench where his father had taught him to sand wood, to measure twice and cut once, to respect the grain. "I haven't built anything since high school shop class," he admitted. "But Emma mentioned wanting a bookshelf for her room, and I thought Dad would have made her one." "He would have," I agreed, my throat tightening. "He made the one in your old room." David nodded, opening the heavy toolbox emblazoned with R. Harlow in faded marker. "I remember. He let me help sand it. You were 8. I smiled at the memory. "You were so proud." A comfortable silence fell between us as David examined the tools, testing the weight of hammers, running his thumb carefully along the edge of a chisel. I watched him from the doorway, struck by how much he resembled Robert in that moment. The same focused expression, the same capable hands. "I'll leave you to it," I said finally. "There's coffee upstairs when you want it." "Thanks, Mom," he replied, already absorbed in sorting through lumber stacked against the wall. Throughout the morning, I heard the comforting sounds of woodworking from below, the rasp of a saw, the tap of a hammer, an occasional muttered oath when something didn't go as planned. I busied myself with weekend chores, giving David space while remaining available. Around noon, he emerged from the basement, sawdust clinging to his clothes and hair. "Any chance there's lunch to go with that coffee?" he asked, a hint of his old smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We ate sandwiches on the back porch, talking about safe topics, Emma's upcoming senior year, the heat wave, a mutual friend's retirement. But as David finished his iced tea, his expression grew more serious. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said finally, "for how I reacted about the trust, and for a lot of things." I set down my glass carefully. "You don't need to apologize." "Yes, I do." He met my eyes directly. "I've been thinking about it a lot. Melissa and we got caught up in what we wanted, what would be convenient for us. We didn't really consider what was best for you." "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. He looked down at his hands. Robert's hands. "Using Dad's workshop today, being in this house. It reminded me why this place matters. It's not just real estate." "No," I agreed. "It's not. I read the trust documents," he continued. "Michael Cooper sent them to my office after I called him. This surprised me." "You contacted Michael?" "I did. Professionally, it was a smart move on your part." He gave a small, rueful laugh. The attorney in me had to acknowledge that, even if the son in me was hurt. "I never intended to hurt you, David. I know that now." He gestured around at the garden, the house, the familiar setting of his childhood. "You were protecting something important, something I should have respected from the beginning." The acknowledgement washed over me like cool water. And now? Now I understand, he said simply. The scholarship fund, maintaining the gardens, keeping the house in the family for at least 5 years, those aren't restrictions. They're a legacy. Dad's and yours. I reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture I hadn't initiated in years. That's exactly what I wanted. He squeezed my fingers gently. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. You see it now, I said. That's what matters. David returned to the basement after lunch, working until late afternoon. When he finally emerged, tired but satisfied, he had the components of a small bookshelf ready for assembly. I'll finish it at home, he said, carefully loading the pieces into his car. But I might need to come back for some of Dad's finishing tools, if that's okay. Any time, I told him, and meant it. The following weekend he returned, this time with Emma in tow. They spent the day in the workshop together, David teaching his daughter the same skills Robert had once taught him. I brought them lemonade and cookies, watching from the doorway as Emma sanded wood with the same serious concentration her father had shown at her age. She's a natural, David said proudly when Emma went upstairs to use the bathroom. Dad would have loved teaching her. He's here in a way, I replied. Through you. David nodded, emotion briefly tightening his features. I've missed this place, he admitted. Coming back, using Dad's tools, it feels right. This will always be your home too, I told him. Trust or no trust. By August, a new Sunday tradition had established itself. David would come in the morning to work on various projects in the workshop. Shelves for Emma's room, a new garden bench for me, a jewelry box for Melissa's birthday. Sometimes Emma joined him, sometimes not. But he came, steady as clockwork, reconnecting with his father's legacy, and gradually with me. Melissa remained conspicuously absent, but I could sense a thaw in her attitude from the way David spoke of her. Less defensive, more matter-of-fact. Melissa sends her regards, he would say, or Melissa liked the tomatoes from your garden. Small acknowledgments, olive branches extended cautiously. Then, on a sweltering Sunday in mid-August, David arrived with unexpected news. We're not buying. The Westport house, he announced as we sat on the porch, cooling off after he'd spent the morning helping me install a new kitchen faucet. Oh? I kept my tone casual. What changed? He wiped sweat from his forehead with a bandana, another of Robert's things he'd adopted. Lots of things. The commute would have been brutal. The renovation costs kept climbing. And, he hesitated. And, I prompted gently. And I realized I was doing it for the wrong reasons. He looked out across the garden. Trying to keep up with colleagues, wanting a prestigious address, thinking about resale value instead of what would make us happy as a family. I nodded, recognizing the echo of my own words from months ago. We're staying put for now, he continued. Our current house is perfectly fine. The school district is good, the mortgage is manageable, and Emma only has 1 more year at home anyway. That sounds like a wise decision, I said carefully. David smiled slightly. It's what Dad would have done. Practical, not flashy. Your father was a very sensible man. He was, David agreed, then added more softly, I wish I'd appreciated that more when he was alive. A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the buzzing of cicadas and the distant shouts of neighborhood children playing despite the heat. Finally, David spoke again. There's something else, he said, his tone more hesitant now. Melissa wants to come to dinner next Sunday. With Emma and me. I felt a small flutter of apprehension. She does? Yes. She wants to apologize. Properly. He looked at me directly. She knows she was wrong, Mom. About a lot of things. I thought of Melissa's dismissive comment that had started all of this, of the months of tension and hurt. But I also thought of Robert, who had always believed in second chances, in the healing power of forgiveness. I'd like that, I said finally. Tell her she's welcome. The following Sunday arrived with a break in the heat wave, a perfect late summer evening with lower humidity and a gentle breeze stirring the wind chimes Robert had hung years ago. I prepared a simple meal of grilled chicken, corn on the cob, and a tomato salad made with vegetables from my out-of-control garden. They arrived together, David, Emma, and Melissa, the latter carrying a bouquet of lilies and looking uncharacteristically nervous. Her usual polish was subdued. her designer outfit replaced by a simple sundress, her expression open rather than guarded. "Eleanor," she said as I opened the door, "thank you for having me. These are for you." "Thank you." I accepted the flowers. "They're beautiful." Dinner began somewhat awkwardly, with Emma carrying most of the conversation, chatting about volleyball camp and her excitement about senior year. But as the meal progressed, the atmosphere gradually relaxed, helped along by good food and David's gentle prompting. Finally, as I served fresh peach cobbler for dessert, Melissa set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Eleanor," she began, her voice steady but humble, "I owe you an apology. What I said about old people not speaking was inexcusable. And my behavior since then, pushing for you to leave your home, making plans without your consent, was equally wrong." I studied Melissa across the table, noting the absence of her usual polished veneer. Without her armor of perfection, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and more genuine than I'd ever seen her. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. She shook her head. "No, it's not enough just to say it. I need you to understand something." She took a deep breath. "When I made that comment, it wasn't really about you. It was about my own grandmother." This unexpected turn caught me off guard. In all the years Melissa had been married to David, she'd rarely mentioned her family beyond the most superficial details. "My grandmother raised me after my parents' divorce," she continued. "She was strict, controlling, convinced she always knew best. When I turned 18 and wanted to go away to college, she refused to help financially unless I lived at home and commuted. She said young people make foolish decisions without guidance. I listened, beginning to understand. I defied her, took out loans, lived in the dorms. We barely spoke for years. Then when I graduated law school, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's." Melissa's voice caught slightly. "By the time I came home, she didn't always recognize me. But in her lucid moments, she was still trying to control everything, my career choices, my relationship with David, even how I dressed." Emma reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "That night at dinner, when you questioned the plans David and I had made," Melissa hesitated, "it triggered something in me. That feeling of being controlled, of not being trusted to make my own decisions. I lashed out with the cruelest thing I could think to say." "I see," I said quietly. "But that's no excuse," she continued. "You're nothing like my grandmother. You've always been kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. And this house," she gestured around at the dining room where we sat, "this isn't just property. It's your home." I lost sight of that. David put his arm around his wife's shoulders. We both did. I took a moment to absorb Melissa's words, to consider the layers of hurt and misunderstanding that had led us here. "Thank you for telling me about your grandmother," I said finally. "That helps me understand." "So," Melissa looked at me hopefully, "can you forgive me?" The question hung in the air between us. I thought of all the small slights over the years, the dismissive comments, the way she'd planned to dismantle the home I loved. But I also saw before me a woman trying to break a cycle, to acknowledge her mistakes, to do better. "Yes," I said simply, "I can forgive you. I do forgive you." The relief on her face was palpable. "Thank you, Eleanor." Emma, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly grinned. "So we're all good now? Because I have news." David laughed, the tension breaking. "Trust Emma to keep us on schedule." "What news, sweetheart?" I asked, grateful for my granddaughter's perfect timing. "I got accepted to the summer writing program at Columbia," she announced proudly. "Professor Winters said my application essay was insightful and nuanced." "That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuine pride warming my voice. Emma had inherited my love of literature, though she'd kept it somewhat hidden beneath her athletic pursuits. "When does it start?" "Next June, right after graduation. It's 6 weeks in New York." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "I'll be living in the dorms, taking workshops with actual published authors." "We're very proud of her," David said, squeezing Emma's shoulder. "Although the program cost gave us a bit of sticker shock," Melissa added with a rueful smile. "Actually," Emma interjected, "that's something I wanted to ask you about, Grandma." She looked suddenly nervous. "Would it be okay if I lived here with you for the fall semester of college? Columbia is only an hour train ride away, and it would save a ton on housing costs." I stared at her in surprise. "You want to live here? With me? If that's okay, she said quickly. I know it's a lot to ask, having a college student around, but I'd help with chores and the garden and… Emma, I interrupted gently. I'd be delighted to have you here. This house has always been meant for family. Her face lit up. Really? You mean it? Of course I do. David and Melissa exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Are you sure, Mom? David asked. College students keep irregular hours, bring friends over, take long showers. I was a high school teacher for 35 years, I reminded him dryly. I'm well acquainted with teenage habits. It was actually my idea, Melissa said, surprising me again. With the writing program and 4 years of Columbia tuition ahead, we need to be practical about costs, and… She hesitated. I thought it might be good for Emma to spend time with you, to learn from you, the way I never did from my grandmother before it was too late. The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'd like that very much. The evening continued with plans for Emma's graduation, discussions of which bedroom she would use when she moved in. Dad's old room has the best light for writing, she insisted, and promises to help prepare the house for a college student's needs. As they were leaving, Melissa hung back, while David and Emma went ahead to the car. Eleanor, she said softly, there's something else I wanted to say. I waited, curious. When David showed me the trust documents, I was angry at first. But then I read them carefully. The scholarship in your names, the protection of the gardens, the lake house for Emma. She shook her head slightly. You weren't being controlling. You were preserving something precious. That was my intention, I acknowledged. It made me think about my own legacy, she continued. What am I passing on to Emma besides ambition and perfectionism? She smiled ruefully. I'm trying to do better, to see value in things beyond their market price. That's all any of us can do, I told her. Try to do better than we did before. She nodded, then surprised me with a quick, genuine hug before joining her family at the car. I stood in the doorway watching them drive away, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The future stretched before me, not diminished by age, but expanded by possibility. I would have time with my granddaughter, sharing stories, wisdom, the simple rhythms of daily life. I would watch her grow into herself, away from the pressure of her parents' expectations, in the shelter of a home built on love. As summer gave way to fall, the patterns of my life shifted and reformed like a kaleidoscope. David came regularly to work in Robert's workshop, gradually building a collection of simple, beautiful furniture pieces, some for his own home, others donated to the high school theater department where Robert had volunteered. Melissa joined us for Sunday dinners, initially somewhat stiff but gradually relaxing into genuine conversation, even helping in the garden despite her designer clothes. Emma's graduation came in early June, a perfect day of sunshine and promise. As I watched her accept her diploma, tall and confident in her cap and gown, I felt Robert's presence beside me, his pride matching my own. She's going to change the world, David whispered, his eyes bright. Yes, I agreed, but in her own way, not ours. 2 weeks later, Emma left for her summer writing program, her car packed with clothes, books, and a small wooden writing desk, the last project David and Robert had worked on together through David's hands. The house felt emptier without her vibrant energy, but the knowledge of her return in September filled the silence with anticipation rather than loneliness. I used the summer to prepare, updating the wireless internet as Emma had requested, clearing space in the refrigerator for her vegetarian meals, converting the small bedroom adjacent to hers into a study area with bookshelves David had built. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Each preparation an act of love, a declaration of welcome. On a warm evening in late August, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The garden stretched before me, not the manicured perfection Melissa had once envisioned, but a living tapestry of vegetables, flowers, and yes, some weeds too. Beautiful in its imperfection, resilient in its wildness. My phone chimed with a text from Emma. Last workshop today. Professor said my story has authentic voice. Can't wait to show you. Home in 2 weeks. Home. Such a simple word for such a complex concept. Not just a structure of wood and stone, but a repository of memories, a sanctuary of self, a legacy of love extending backward and forward through generations. Melissa's cruel words at that fateful dinner had wounded me deeply. Old people shouldn't speak when important decisions are being made. But in their way, they had been a gift. They had awakened me from the complacency of age, reminded me that my voice still mattered, that I still had choices, agency, power. The deed transfer that David and Melissa had once taken for granted now rested safely in the future, protected by legal documents, but more importantly, by new understanding. My home remained my own, not because I had refused to share it, but because I had insisted it be shared on terms that honored its true value. As darkness gathered and the first stars appeared, I thought of Robert, of our life together in this house, of all the decisions, good and bad, that had led me to this moment of hard-won peace. We did all right, didn't we? I whispered to the evening air, imagining his answer in the gentle stirring of wind chimes. In 2 weeks, Emma would arrive with her boxes of books, her laptop, her young woman's dreams. We would cook together in the kitchen where I had once taught her father to make pancakes. She would write at the desk, built by hands connected through 3 generations. I would share with her the wisdom of my years, and she would share with me the fresh perspective of hers. Old people, it turns out, shouldn't just speak, they should be heard. Not because age automatically confers wisdom, but because every human voice matters. Every story deserves telling. Every life holds value beyond measure. The deed transfer was canceled, but something more important had been transferred instead. Understanding, respect, the recognition that some things cannot be bought or sold, but must be earned through listening, through seeing, through honoring each other's truths. And in that exchange, we had all become richer than any property could ever make us. If my story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more journeys like mine. I share new chapters of my life each week, and I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Remember, at any age, your voice matters. See you in the next story.